Hello, everyone. My name is Lori Dupree Brown, and I'm the director of the UW-Madison campus-wide 4W initiative, and that stands for Women and Wellbeing in Wisconsin and the World. Thank you for participating in our 2021 conference, Resistance and Reimagination, Gender Change and the Arts, with the UW System Women's and Gender Studies Consortium. And thank you for joining this first session of our meeting, the 4W Streets panel, Pedagogy of Care, Tools for Discussing Human Trafficking. We're going to begin. This is the first session of our entire conference. It's a very exciting array of local and global presentations. And we're going to begin today and each day with a land announcement. So I'm going to share that with you now so that you can read along and reflect about your own relationship to the land that we rest and work on. The University of Wisconsin-Madison occupies ancestral Ho-Chunk land, a place their nation has called Dejop since time immemorial. In an 1832 treaty, the Ho-Chunk were forced to cede this territory. Decades of ethnic cleansing followed when both the federal and state government repeatedly but unsuccessfully sought to forcibly remove the Ho-Chunk from Wisconsin. This history of colonization informs our shared future of collaboration and innovation. Today, UW-Madison respects the inherent sovereignty of the Ho-Chunk Nation, along with the 11 other First Nations of Wisconsin. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us together here today. And please join us in uncovering such truths every day. I think I'm very, I think it means a lot to bring that reflection to this particular panel. I want to share a few details about how we can be connected and communicate during the session. During the presentation, please feel free to pose questions for the presenters in the Q&A. That is located at the bottom of your screen. If you're having any technical issues, you can use the chat to write your question, and one of our conference administrators will help you. There will also be closed captioning for this event by the Northwestern Court reporters, so please look into the chat if you're interested in accessing that CART captioning link. In addition to this presentation, we have presentations going on throughout the day between now and Saturday. And we also have continuous events ongoing Thursday through Saturday. There is an artist exhibit on resistance and reimagination that has been curated by 4W Assistant Director Olivia Dahlquist. And there is a virtual poster session with pre-recorded short presentations from all over the state of Wisconsin, all of our colleges and university and system campuses. So please visit and comment on those sites. It's a great way to engage. Lastly, we are recording today's session and we will share these videos once they've been captioned. So thank you for joining. I am now going to pass the baton to Dr. Jean Garan. She is going to be introducing the session and she co-directs the 4W Streets project along with Dr. Araceli Alonso. So Jean, please take it away. And thank you so much for this amazing project that you have worked so hard on over the past nearly 5 years.
Thank you, Lori, and it's a pleasure to be here with you all today. As Lori said, my name is Jean Garan, and I'm the Director for Engagement for 4W Streets. And for those of you new to Streets, the acronym stands for Social Transformations to End Exploitation and Trafficking for Sex. And Streets as a project was launched in the early days of 4W, along with our 4W colleagues, and Lori and Araceli and I got together with some other community members and other UW colleagues to design a project to confront human trafficking in through collaboration in higher education. Our mission is to contribute to the end of human trafficking through education, action research, and collaborative engagement. But the important piece here, and the most important part of our mission statement, is that we do everything grounded in the perspectives and preferences of survivors. That was important to all of us in those initial days and has really informed the work as it's evolved over the last several years. Um, as I said, I direct the engagement piece. Our research agenda is led by Dr. Lara Gerasi, and then you will hear much more today from Dr. Araceli Alonso that Lori introduced already. She's a talented instructor, and she leads our education track piece of the project. Before I introduce her again and more fully, I'd just like to highlight a couple things about Streets, since some of you may be new to it. We are in just a couple weeks going to be going live with a new website. That website is really a repository of the resources and the work we've been doing over the last 5 to 6 years. You'll be able to find it through the 4W website. And again, it should be ready in a couple of weeks that it will go live. So look for us there and look for more resources there. Another thing I wanted to highlight was an online conversation series that we launched the end of 2020. It's called Two-Way Streets, and it's our way to bring together professionals in an open platform to talk about timely topics related to confronting human trafficking. There's another one scheduled for May, and if you're interested in being on our newsletter list, I will put an email in the chat, and you just send an email asking to be added to our Streets list, and you'll be able to receive announcements on upcoming events from us. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ara, but she asked me again to reiterate the importance that survivor voices and leadership is to our work. And you're going to be hearing a lot about how that plays out in the context of education. And I just want to thank Ara for her incredible leadership in integrating survivor voices with our students. I think these tools you'll be hearing about today have been incredibly life-giving for the survivors that we work with, and also, and very importantly, life-changing for our students. So Ara, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jean, for this kind introduction of Streets. And thank you, Lori, for your commitment to this important 4W Women's Studies, Gender and Women's Studies Summit and Conference. And thank you, Stephanie and Elizabeth, for all the innovative work that you have done organizing this conference. And of course, Olivia, thank you for all the work behind the scenes. And finally, thank you to the audience. Thanks to you. We don't see you, but we feel you, and we feel your support, and we feel your enthusiasm for being here with us today. So thank you very, very much for being here. Introducing the plenary of today, the plenary of Streets, I wanted to go back to a point that Jean has mentioned, that Streets focuses on survivors' perspectives, on survivors' voices, on survivors' lived experiences. But I also want to add something more, just to acknowledge, because this is also what we do a lot in the Streets. We acknowledge precisely that the stories of survivors cannot be easily told, cannot be easily shared, because these voices have been suppressed. These voices have been silenced. So the construction of silence is a topic that we have worked with in our research in the Streets, in our classes, in our collaboration with agencies, with organizations, with all the stakeholders that we work with, social workers, psychologists, lawyers, law enforcement, service providers. And for this collaboration and for these conversations with victims and survivors, we use the pedagogy of care as a methodology that acknowledges and respects that silence based on three principles. So before we start with the plenary or with the voices of the students, I wanted to focus on these three principles. Embodied language is the first one. So embodied language, the language of the body without conversations like a speaking conversation. And we understand language in embody language. We understand language as a process through the actions and the reactions of the body. The second principle is creative expressions, where we use trauma-informed tools based on the arts to respect that silence, but also to be able to construct individual and collective narratives and stories in despite of that silence. The third principle is transversal approaches to care, where we use care with capital letters as a transversal methodology to confront very difficult issues, to challenge structural violence, and to transform all of this through mutual care and through the care for each other. With these three principles in mind, we open now the plenary with our wonderful students who have walked this journey with us in person and also in a virtual form. We have Rachel, we have Sruti and Justine, who will illustrate with wisdom, with knowledge and understanding the work that we do in the streets and the work that we want to do and share with you today. So without further ado, Rachel, is all yours now.
Thank you very much, Dr. Alonso, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me here. My name is Rachel Sina, and I am a senior student at UW-Madison, studying biology and gender and women's studies with a certificate in global health. My connection to this pedagogy of care and work using artistic tools for discussing human trafficking began when I attended the summer 2019 Street Study Abroad program with Dr. Alonso, which happened in Spain and Morocco. I was interested in this program because it was a really wonderful opportunity for us as students to learn about a human rights issue from individuals that were actually being affected by international human trafficking. So this experience was very transformative and a truly unique opportunity to learn in a very immersive setting abroad and work towards a really deep understanding of this issue. So today I'm going to be talking about theater for healing, which is one of the techniques that we used on the study abroad trip to connect with the women, with the migrant women that we met in Casablanca, Morocco. And this was actually the first technique that we used. So overall, in a broad sense, this technique allows participants to engage in the storytelling process, both as actors and directors, to promote mutual understanding of each other's lived experiences. This technique of theater for healing allows students to learn from survivors while simultaneously allowing the survivors, in our case, the migrant women that we met, to share their stories in a safe environment. So I included this quote from Maya Angelou in this introduction slide here, which is, "There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you." And I thought this quote was relevant for because theater for healing is a tool that allows survivors to tell their stories in a collective manner, letting out things that might have been too traumatizing, raw, or hurtful to share in other settings because of that constructed silence that Dr. Alonso mentioned. So we can go ahead to the next slide. So I'll begin by describing overall our experience with Theater for Healing in Casablanca with this group of women that we met, facilitated by a local nonprofit organization, Minority Globe. So something that is really important to note here is that we began this experience of Theater for Healing with trust building exercises with the women. So we didn't just jump into acting or sharing stories or experiences. And this was important because as survivors of trafficking, sexual abuse, and other forms of trauma, the women that we interacted with needed to know that the group of students was a safe environment for them to share their stories in a vulnerable way. So Ruben Odoy was one of the leaders of Minority Globe. He's pictured in the bottom photo there on the right. He was there to facilitate these trust building exercises as a member of the local community. He acted as a safe resource for the women and was that person who connected us with them. And after we spent a day or two building trust, we were then able to transition into engaging in skits as a group. So Ruben would sometimes give the group a prompt or a situation for us to begin with, and then the women themselves would actually step in as leaders and begin to direct the skit, inserting themselves and students into roles as actors to demonstrate the situations that mirrored their experiences, including migration and human trafficking. So here the women were able to share their stories while maintaining agency over what they shared, as well as who would be playing the roles in these stories. And in this way, the tool of theater for healing and the framework that we used was trauma informed. So, as a group, we wanted to avoid re victimizing and re traumatizing the women, ensuring that they never had to relive their experiences in a traumatic way while telling their story. And instead, the women themselves were able to decide if they wanted to play the role of the victim, the trafficker, or anybody else in the story that they wanted. They really had complete control over how the skits were planned and completed. And furthermore, when it came time for us to plan the performance that we would do on stage as a large group, the women were also able to plan and select the skits they wanted us to perform. So these were the skits that they found most representative and informative of their collective experiences. So they chose the most impactful moments and kind of turning points in their time in trafficking. And it was really remarkable to engage in this process of theater for healing because it allowed students, including myself, to kind of directly insert ourselves into the characters in these women's stories, which really fostered a much deeper understanding of their experiences of trauma, as well as the strength and resilience that these women embodied. We can go ahead to the next slide. So here are two images that were captured during the last day that our students had with the women during our performance on stage. So because we didn't really have many props to work with, many of the pieces of the story needed to be represented using a set of chairs, which you can see in the images here, or by only using the actors' bodies themselves. So that's that piece of embodied language that Dr. Alonso was mentioning before. And this performance on stage was really incredible because it illustrated a very complete picture of these women's experiences from their home countries in sub-Saharan Africa and the trafficking recruitment process, crossing the desert, as well as many of the characters that shape their stories for the better and for the worse. We can go ahead to the next slide. So lastly here, I just wanted to address kind of the outcomes of this tool. So the outcomes here are really remarkable and powerful, showing the power of this tool, Theater for Healing, to facilitate discussions of human trafficking. So first, by using this tool, the group was able to foster mutual learning and understanding between the students and the women that we met. So the students were able to learn about the women's experiences in the human trafficking system. And also for the time we spent together, the students were also able to share about their lives with the women, which was a really fascinating and community building experience as well. Furthermore, through the skits we engaged in and the performance at the very end, a sort of tapestry of voices and stories was created by taking threads from each survivor's experience and weaving them together into a collective illustration of these experiences of both trauma and resilience. So ultimately, we can conclude about this tool with the knowledge that Theater for Healing promotes collective expression and healing for the group of survivors engaging in this tool. It was a very powerful and transformative experience, and I am very proud and blessed that I got to engage with this. So thank you very much.
And then, so I think I'm on mute, and then COVID-19 came, and COVID-19 forced us all to try to be greater than the circumstances. And that happened to all of us, and it happened the work that we do with the streets, that we really try to be greater than everything that was happening. So with the women and with our collaborators, with the agencies, organizations, and all the stakeholders that I mentioned before, psychologists, social workers, We created a magical journey also with the students using methods that we hadn't used before. And one of these methods was the soundscapes of healing, using acoustics, using sounds and singing in a moment that we were confined, because this was the summer 2020. And many of us, the students, myself and Jean, we were here in the United States, across the United States, and the women we were working with were in Morocco, in Casablanca and Rabat, and they were completely, strictly confined in their homes without really, they could not go outside. They were fined if they went outside other than for grocery shopping. So we use sounds and singing as metaphors to immerse ourselves in the environment of the desert and to go through this journey from Nigeria and up to southern Spain, southern Europe, or to northern Morocco, or to northern Africa, West Africa, Morocco. And feel it. So it was immersion and see, I feel it with our own senses. So with these homemade elements, the women had just close by because they couldn't go outside to have any tool. They used a piece of paper. They used an empty bottle of water. They used everything they had to make us feel the journey as they were crossing the Sahara Desert. So they wanted to put us in touch with the aspects of their journey that they couldn't be expressed otherwise with words. So they also created a song that expresses suffering and trauma, but that also expresses the remarkable stories of resilience, survival, and social healing. So this is what we want to show you now. I'm going to share the screen with you. Um, we want to show you one of the exercises that we did with sound, with the soundscapes that now we call it geophony. In the academy, geophony is the sound of nature, the sound of the environment. Something I have to tell you about this, my volume is very up. The women are making a rhythm. We presented this exercise to the students without really telling them much about what was going on, only that the women were recreating the sounds of the desert. So you are going to hear the rhythm. Sometimes this rhythm is a little bit louder. Sometimes the rhythm is lower. It is on purpose, not only because we don't hear it well, but also because the rhythm is never the same when we are walking through the desert. And then we will hear the song, and then we can go through all of this together in the next two slides. This is 5 minutes, so please bear with me. Oh.
Pour les bienfaits de ma famille, j'ai décidé de prendre la route en passant par le Mali et aussi par l'Algérie. Arrivé en Algérie, on est tombé sur des Touaregs, on On est tombé sur des jadis. Les femmes ont été violées. Les garçons battus et reculés. De tout ce qu'ils avaient, d'autres étaient tués. La 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 la. Les hommes ont été vendus. La 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 la. Les femmes ont été violées. La 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 la. C'était vraiment horrible. La 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 la. C'était vraiment difficile. Una buona muia di botananga, na kindaki movimbo, na lekaki na malipena, ajeri, tuna ajeri, tokutani na batorega, tokutani na badadisa, izarati mare. La 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la.
So now, I hope that you could hear the sound, at least the rhythm that the women wanted to share with us, and also the song. And we are going to see the lyrics of the song. This is an exercise that we did with the students right after. And the students didn't know what we were going to do. So we asked them to express what they felt, just with one word, with one sentence, what they felt through this exercise that the women were sharing with them. And I want you to pay attention now. We'll revisit the same slide in a little bit when Sruti and Justine are going to speak about it. But I want you to focus now on the left ones, the left ones from up to bottom. And in case you cannot read it, I'm going to read you what one of the students wrote, the right upper left. She expressed it this way: crickets and mosquitoes at night, chattering teeth and shivering. Flies dive bombing with uneven steps of fatigue in the day, raspy breathing between cracked lips. So through the exercise, this is how the student walk with the women without really having to converse and telling stories. If you see the one below, this student is expressing it through panting, screams, and crying, things that none of these words were told by the women at all. And even the song was sung in Lingala and in Otuo, that there are languages that we don't understand. And then the student below, if you see the student below has an empty space because she expressed it as an emptiness. This is what she felt. And she told us later that she felt a deep void, but precisely within this void, everything is possible. Now, we wanted to share with you the lyrics so that we all understand, because the lyrics were translated for us in the 2 second languages of Olive and Charity. I'm going to read it with all of you. For the well-being of my family, I have decided to take the road, crossing Mali to Algeria. We fell on Boko Arabs, the jihadists. Women have been raped, boys beaten and ripped off everything they had. Others have been killed. Others have been sold. Pregnant women have been raped. It was really horrible. It was really difficult. But we also want you to focus on the la, 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 because the women expressed, they told us that this la, la, la for them expressed happiness because they were reaching a land that was outside the desert. So when we hear the lyrics without really understanding what it means, we don't see the suffering. They are singing, they are expressing in their own way, they want to, the way they want to express it with us. So with this now, we are going to turn it to Sruti. And now from Sruti and Justine, they will run the whole show until the end that you can ask questions.
Hi everyone, my name is Shruti. I am a senior at the university. I use she, her pronouns. In May, I'll be graduating with a neurobiology degree, as well as a minor in gender and women's studies. And this course really drew my attention. I was actually signed up to do the in-person study abroad, but with COVID, it switched over to a virtual platform. And I was most drawn to it because I want to pursue a career in mental health. And I found this to be a perfect intersection of mental health, trauma-informed care, and gender and women's studies research. And I'm very grateful to have taken this course and just learned all of these creative skills to aid my learning and communication. So I just want to talk a little bit about the trauma-informed process that we used. As Rachel and Dr. Alonso mentioned, we had to create a space of trust and a safe space for everybody. To share these stories is really difficult. And again, we didn't want to re-traumatize or make anyone relive any experiences. And so using art as a tool for resilience and storytelling was incredibly important for us. The course was called The Circle of Care. And we use this circle of care to really create trust and bonding between the students and the women who are telling us their stories. So there are 3 main ways that we were using these tools. So one is the visual theater that Rachel went through, which was more physical, in which the students were actually taking part in these stories with the women. The second is recreating sounds, interpretive song, through which we just saw in the YouTube video. And then the last one is visual arts through directed collaging, which Justine will talk more about. You can go to the next slide. So this is something that I did as I was watching the women sing this song. before they were singing, we had like gone through and talked about their journeys, and it was just a very emotional moment for me as I was hearing it. And so I was listening and also like doodling on the side of a piece of paper. Um, Doodling for me is a way for me to just process what's happening. And so I had like a really rough draft of this, and then I recreated it with some uh, pens and watercolor. But these are just, this is like how I visualized their journey through this song. And again, as Dr. Alonso said, like we didn't know exactly what they were saying because they were speaking in native languages that we didn't know. But after we learned what they were saying, and I kind of compiled a bunch of words that the other students had also written. So you can see like words like sand and toes, loneliness, emptiness, tears, silence, strength. And it's just these women walking through these hills looking for Europe, looking for better land that's outside of the desert. And then I will hand it off to Justine to talk about the visual arts and the directed collage.
Yeah, thank you so much. Hi, everybody. My name is Justine Hill. I'm a junior at Madison, and I'm also studying neurobiology, as well as pursuing a certificate in global health. And after taking this course, gender women studies. I was initially drawn to this course before it was virtual, but I actually was having trouble committing to going abroad. And so for me, the virtual experience actually offered a great opportunity for me to be able to balance some commitments I had in Madison at the time with this wonderful experience. Um, Ultimately, I was drawn to the course because of my passion for global health, as well as my passion to combat gender-based violence, where I saw this as an intersection of the two, where I'd be able to see how gender-based violence has real impacts on the well-being and health, as well as see different ways in which people recover and are resilient and heal from these experiences. So as you can see on the screen right now, my reflections are on the top and in the middle on this page, where one of the things that spoke the most to me in this song was the rhythm of hearing your own footsteps. And overall, this represented how alone and how vast this space was, where other students picked up on this pattern as well. As Dr. Alonso mentioned, Kate in the bottom left corner just left this completely empty, as well as Angelica just writing silence. And I think in Shruti's collage, you can see all the emptiness and just the clouds. So through the song, we were able to be taken to this vast space. And I was very excited when I found out that we would be sharing it with everybody today, because for me, it really brought me back to the first time that I had heard it, and that moment and all the vividness and all the emotions that I remember. And when I take a step back, I'm just in my own room staring at my computer screen. And yet this really just highlights the ability that this sound has to transform the spaces that we're in, and especially in the virtual setting, the importance of using these kinds of techniques. So now I'd like to talk a bit about the visual components that we used to facilitate these conversations. So the main tool that our instructors created and that we used was called directed collages, where before the students met with the survivors and with the women, our instructors asked them to create collages out of 35 images that they had already picked out, and asked the survivors to choose specific images that related to their experiences and related to themselves, and then explain and reflect on why they chose certain pictures and why they didn't choose others. So in the next slides, you can see the service organizations working through creating these collages. And again, this is before students met with the survivors. So on the next page, you can see the results of these collages. So these are the collages that the women made to tell their stories. And not even tell their stories, but really just share experiences. So they were able to do this using the collages in one way by having the pictures as kind of a base to walk through different things that they wanted to share. And pictures served as a fundamentally important way to share these experiences, because when you see an image, there's no expectation of any information to be shared. And each survivor, when they walked through how they related to each picture, some of the pictures they focused for one sentence on, other pictures they discussed for a couple minutes. But in this way, survivors were given complete freedom and agency over what they wanted to share and about how it related to them. And additionally, as we've kind of seen as a theme throughout these tools of using art, art also has this ability to transmit meaningful emotional messages without them necessarily being needed to be explicitly stated. So for example, as you all look at these pictures, I'm sure that this is eliciting certain emotions in you. And yet the survivors didn't have to explicitly explain any of those experiences directly. And overall, after we had this experience with the survivors, the service organizations actually spoke to our instructors and informed them that this had acted as a sort of catharsis for the survivors, because prior to having this tool of directed collages, there wasn't really a way for survivors to share their stories without risking re-victimization. Um, but through using this technique, they were able to share some of their experience, and in doing so release that and gain some relief from that. And in the same way, us as students were able to learn about their experiences and their journeys. So on the next slide, I'd like to highlight how we were able to learn about their journeys from using directed collages. So as you can see in the bottom right of this corner, there's an image of a girl raising her fist. And this image emerged in almost every directed collage that we saw. And so in this way, by using this approach, we were able to identify themes and patterns and experiences from each of the individual survivors' perspectives. And at the same way, we also were able to contrast differences. So for example, although this collage was repeated throughout different, or this picture is repeated throughout different collages, what it meant and how it was interpreted varied. For some, it meant power. For others, it meant joy. And so in this way, we were able to honor individual experiences and also draw patterns from all these different journeys. So in addition to using the directed collages as a technique to facilitate these conversations, we are also given creative assignments throughout the course to process and conceptualize what we had learned. So on the left here, you can see one of the assignments we had was to create flowers where resilience acted as a stem, and we were supposed to reflect on the different things that we had heard stemming from resilience. And so in this way, we are given insight as to some of the processes that go into using art as a way of self-expression, which I think facilitated our understanding of how survivors were using arts as well. And additionally, it was just a very effective tool to conceptualize these different themes that we had seen emerge. So overall, these two different patterns led to me creating this piece of artwork that you see on the right, where this woman with her fist raised kind of represents the stem of resilience, and everything radiating from it is what resilience and what this image meant to survivors as they shared their experience. So I'd also like to highlight really quickly, and if you look at the image in the bottom left of this slide, you can see this drawing. And this drawing was actually created by one of the organizations that we worked with that didn't have access to the pictures that were being used in the direct collages. And I just wanted to highlight this because these survivors, instead of using the pictures, created their own collages with their own drawings to walk us through their experience. And in this way, because we had been practiced in identifying patterns from the directed collages, we were still able to really understand their journey. And it also highlights how much work and effort went into on the survivors end of things, on the service providers and our course instructors, overcoming certain challenges that presented themselves in this virtual setting so that we could have these experiences and learn directly from survivors of trafficking. And then one of the last things I like to touch on is our final projects for the course. So if you now pay attention to the picture on the right of the screen, this image, as well as the image I showed before of the girl raising her fist, were both pieces of art for our final projects. So our final projects were to transmit a message from the Nigerian women in Spain back to their sisters in Nigeria. And we were split up into groups where we were supposed to like transmit one of the themes that we had learned. So my group specifically focused on empowerment as a tool to prevent trafficking. And crucially, the use of art throughout our whole experience with the program allowed me to not only be inspired by this art to transmit this message, but be completely informed by this art. I literally outlined and traced drawings that I had seen throughout the course in order to create this piece. And therefore, I knew that the message that we were transmitting wasn't subject to any of my own interpretations, but instead was a direct message from the survivors to their sisters in Nigeria. And the last point that I'd like to touch on is through outlining and retracing these drawings that we saw, similar to what Sruti mentioned before, art also functioned as a way for students to individually, or at least myself personally, to process what we had learned. So through retracing this, I was able to intimately reconnect with what I had learned and process through all the emotions that I had felt. And I think Sruti is going to touch briefly on her final project as well.
So for our final project, we focused on images and flyers that are targeted towards the young girls and women who might be deceived into believing that Europe holds a better life for them. You'll notice in the lyrics, one of the women says, "I need to make this journey for my family." So many of the women believe that if they go to Europe, if they make the journey, that they're going to make money and they might see success and they'll be able to bring that back to their families. But in reality, many of these young girls are actually recruited into human trafficking and sex trafficking rings by community leaders, by family members, by trusted friends, by other women recruiting them. And they have this idea that Europe is the place to have a better life, when in reality, their naivety is being exploited, actually. So on the right side, you'll see some quotes from both Grace and Praise talking about their journey, and right below them are some of the images that they used in their collages to explain their journey. And then on the left is something that I created. I painted the piece in the image on that to explain the severity of the trauma and of this assumption that Europe is the land of milk and honey. This is like a really common scene that a lot of the women explained, crossing over the Mediterranean Sea. So that's the Mediterranean Sea, and then the green land in the back with the EU flag, it represents Europe. The boat looks very similar to the boat represented in their collages. These boats would often have many more people than they should have. People would die on the trips over the Mediterranean Sea, and I replaced the milk and honey with blood and poison, because that was the reality of their journeys. And so this particular image is really just a warning for young people who might be deceived into thinking that this is a journey that they should make. This image is actually being used right now by an organization in Nigeria for preventing human and sex trafficking. And yeah, so I'll hand it off to Ara for a little wrap up.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Rachel, Sruti, and Justine, for showing some of the tools that we use in this pedagogy of care with streets education to bring the conversation of survivors and victims and to understand from their own point of view the stories, the collective stories. So you have show us theater for healing, soundscapes for healing, and directed collages. I just wanted also to touch briefly before we start with the questions that we'll understand much more also through the questions that you are having in the audience, but what this means for us and what this means for the students and what this means for the organization. So we have talked about the leaders of the streets and as teachers, as educators. You have seen the examples of the students, and I just wanted to touch a little bit about organizations that work with us, the partner organizations. We had a long-term relationship with these organizations, and these tools that we have created in the streets with the academic knowledge, but applied academic knowledge, has helped organizations in many different aspects of their work with victims and survivors. For example, victim identification, that is very difficult. So we have in this collaboration, we have sharing the tools. The organizations have been able in Morocco and in Spain have been able to identify victims, and victims, I'm using victim in a legal term. The women don't feel themselves as victims. They are very courageous. They are the most resilient women that I have ever met. And I work with many women around the world. But this victim is for legal purposes so that they can have a protection that they deserve. So it has helped organizations to identify victims, as Rachel was talking at the beginning through the theater. The organizations, the directors of the organizations, these are an organization in Morocco for human rights through the arts also. So they were watching and they could see who were the women who really had embedded these stories into their own souls. Nobody knows about these stories of trafficking, at least you have going through them. So it helped the organizations to make some legal protection for the women. And then in Spain, what happened in Spain is that the students, in the case of theater that we are talking now about Rachel's presentation, the students, and Rachel can talk a little bit about this, the organizations in Spain, that is the destination country, in this case, the destination country of women from Nigeria crossing the Sahara Desert, arriving in Algeria, arriving in Morocco, and crossing then the Mediterranean Sea and arriving in Spain. The service providers, psychologists, they don't know about the stories of women, and they don't talk with the women because it's not their job to elicit the stories from the women. Their job is to provide the services that the women need. So they were very eager. They were very eager to learn from the students, from our UW students, to learn through the theater, to learn what the students had learned. So what the students did is perform. The students performed for all the organizations in Spain so that the leaders of the organizations, the directors, the psychologists, service providers, even lawyers, that they could learn from the students and from the theater. So the students didn't speak. They performed what they have learned directly with the women in Morocco, that they are still trapped in Morocco. This is a transit country, it's not a destination country. So they could learn, and then the students just translate it into a different theater to show to them, to the organizations in Spain. So as you know, also Justine mentioned, and as Sruti, this was a kind of catharsis for the organizations, the leaders of the organizations, and for the women themselves, who normally don't have cannot find the way to express themselves until we come out with tools that they can express it using cultural expressions from their own cultures. So also something that I wanted to touch is something that Justine mentioned with one of the collages. one of the collages that was not a directed collage. We created directed collages to also see patterns. How was your life? How was life before the journey? How was life during the journey? How was life after the journey? And in some instances, as Justine mentioned, this was not possible because it was not just an organization. The women were confined at home. They have no printers. They have no access to internet other than through their phones. So they couldn't print the collages that we had created here on campus. So they just did it with pieces of paper, drawing, whatever they wanted. So it helped us also to dismantle the notion that we have about migration, because it was very, very clear that there was a pattern with the direct collages and the free collages that the women just expressed through drawings, that when the women were at home, they had a happy family life. They had everything that they needed. In some circumstances, they were forced to leave. In some circumstances, they just wanted a better life, but they had a good life. And then during the transit, it was hell, complete hell. And arriving in the transit country, like in Morocco, life continues as bad as it can be. And the women said, I will never, ever go back. I mean, I would never do this if I knew what I was going to find. And the women in Spain, exactly the same. So what we did, and I think also, so the students mentioned this, this is the circle of care. We took the voices of the women in Spain who wanted to tell our sisters in Nigeria that if they want to migrate, they have to do it this way, and this way, so that they can avoid trafficking. Migration, everybody should be free to migrate, right? This is a human right to migrate and to move to places, but be careful if you find this person, be careful if someone tells you, don't call this. So they wanted us to do it. And with all this art, we were able to bring it back to origin of trafficking, that was Nigeria, specifically Benin City. I think with this, we'll have plenty of time for questions, and I would love everyone could answer in the panel, and I'll be just listening and learning from your questions. Thank you so, so much to the students who did an amazing job and help us to process and to apply all of this knowledge through the tools. Thank you so, so much, and thanks for the audience for listening.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ara. Thank you, Shruti, Justine, and Rachel. Excellent job. Well done. Very proud of you. We do have one question that follows quickly on what you were just speaking to, Ara. And the question was related to did the NGOs, service provider organizations that you worked with using these tools, did they also provide services, other services to the women? And I think maybe comment on what they do, what else they do, which is really a lot of their work is providing services, but describe that range of services. And then, yeah, I guess, oh, and the importance of being able to do this only with organizations that actually can provide counseling and services after these activities as well.
Of course, this is a great, great question. So depending on the organization and depending on the country, they offer different services. And in Nigeria, the services are mostly awareness and protection, so that the girls, the young women, sometimes there are girls, because when they leave Nigeria, they can be 12, and then they grow up through the journey until they reach, some of them reach after they are 18, some of them reach when they are younger. So the organizations we work with in Nigeria work with the protection of the girls. And as I mentioned before, so trying to discourage migration or encourage migration, but protecting against human trafficking. And in Morocco, the organizations work a lot through healing, thinking that these women leave soon. These women are going to leave as soon as they can. So the organizations we work with, there are many lawyers, so they protect legal aspects for the women who are still in Morocco. And they are trapped, but probably they will be trapped forever because they don't know if they are going to leave, but they will keep trying to leave. They will keep trying to go up north. So the organizations work in many different aspects, mostly legal, and also they give jobs, artistic jobs to the women. Many of these women just become artists. And they have a theater group that now, because of all of this, and we are doing it for several years, some of the women just have become actors and they are performing. The UN is working with this organization. Minority Globe is an organization run by migrants. So they know exactly what migrant women need, and they are trying to make a living for women in Morocco so they don't have to go through another extremely difficult journey. They have crossed the Sahara Desert, but if they leave Morocco, they will have to cross the Mediterranean Sea. So even if they have survived crossing the desert, now they have to cross the Mediterranean Sea. So this organization is worried, is trying to protect the women so that the women make a living in Morocco and can stay. It's very difficult for these women to stay in Morocco anyway, with a different, especially the women who are coming from Nigeria, because of the different language and different color and different religion. They just want to go up north. The organizations we work with in Spain, they provide all kinds of services for the rehabilitation of the survivors. They are already survivors. In Morocco, there are still victims, and many of them are still trapped in the trafficking network. In Spain, most of them, some of them are still trapped in the network because they have to pay the debt, the trafficking debt. But many of them are already survivors, and the organizations in Spain, these organizations have a commitment through the government. They have free education, even higher education is free medical services, free housing. So the service in Spain is very, very, very wide, very holistic, very, very comprehensive.
Thank you, Ara. I think we have a couple questions for the students, so I'm going to move to those next. First of all, I'd love you to comment on the exchange and some of the questions that you were asked by the women and some of those conversations, because we did try to make it as two-way as possible. It wasn't always easy, but they had some interesting questions for you. So I'll start with that, and then I do have another follow-up question for the students as well after. If any of you wanted to comment on the two-way exchange aspect of this.
Sure. I can talk about that in the in-person course first. So that exchange, absolutely. So in the time that we were working with these women, we would oftentimes, if we were like taking breaks, we would just sit together and talk about what our lives were like. They would ask questions about school, about what it was like living in Wisconsin, living in America. We got some interesting questions about politics sometimes. And yeah, it was, it really felt like it was a very horizontal relationship. And we were really able to connect with them on a deep level in that way. Something else that we did with the women that I thought was really incredible is that we always ate lunch together. And this was a really great way as well for us to kind of be on that same level in the horizontal relationship and connect over food. And oftentimes it was kinds of food that they would really enjoy, or from their host or from their home countries. So that was really interesting to get to know them on that level as well.
Justine or Sruti? Go ahead, Sruti.
I can also touch on how we interacted virtually. Sadly, we can like share lunches and things with them, but every time we got on a call, we just chatted for like 10-15 minutes about what's going on, like how's our summer going, what's happening with COVID, like all these things, just to get a feel for like who we are and who they are, and just kind of get to know each other. So while we couldn't do like explicit like physical trust building exercises, I think that just like conversation and communication was a lot of the trust building that we did virtually.
Yeah, just to add to that, before we started any discussion, we would go around and everybody would do an introduction, which really helped kind of uh, break down some of the nerves and everything about speaking. And additionally, I think that actually in some ways having a screen up made us feel a little bit more comfortable asking questions. So that was kind of an interesting component of the virtual experience, although um, getting lunch together does sound pretty fun. But yeah, it all took place during COVID summer as well as during the George Floyd protests. So we also talked about like human rights violations happening in the United States with police brutality. And yeah, we talked a lot about the different experiences with COVID as well, just what our different governments were doing and how they were responding.
To build on that, Justine, if I could ask you to continue, and then this, I'm combining a couple questions here, but one of them related to all three of you students. What impact did this course have on you and you think your future career trajectory? And for Justine specifically, if you could start, because another question says, what have you learned from working with 4W Streets to address human trafficking domestically? And I happen to know that you are doing just that. So if I could start with you, Justine, and then if Sruti and Rachel could comment on their own trajectories as a result, or what's changed as a result of this course. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. So I attended this course, and at the same time, I was doing a little bit of virtual volunteer work with a domestic violence organization, which I worked on the criminal expungement clinics for survivors of domestic violence and sexual violence. And I started to see these comparisons between that experience and human trafficking, and I was just so inspired and also felt this new commitment and passion to fighting this human rights violation. That ultimately I was able to get involved with doing more work with streets to look at how the criminalization of human trafficking survivors impacts them. So I'm now working as an intern with 4W Streets, and it's been a wonderful experience and has completely changed my trajectory. I've planned to continue working with streets. I'm feeling very committed to this work, and I don't think any of that would have happened without having this abroad experience.
Rachel or Shruti, have comments?
Absolutely. As far as how this experience will inform future careers and lives, so in the future, I hope to go to medical school and become a physician. And something that I think about all the time in that is that I really hope and strive to be an advocate for my patients in the future. And part of that is understanding their full experiences, their past, and how that is impacting their current lives. I think that this idea of trauma-informed care and having that understanding that individuals have these experiences and stories that we can't see on the outside, and they can still be dealing with that years afterwards. So I think that for me, the biggest thing has been that piece of trauma-informed care and having that recognition, as well as I think a big idea that came out of this course as well is that there are other ways to communicate with individuals. It doesn't necessarily have to be a conversation. It can be through art, theater, and visual arts as well. So there are many different ways to communicate, and I will keep that in mind as I continue to learn and approach my career in the future.
I am an aspiring clinical psychologist, so I want to be a therapist when I grow up, I guess. So trauma-informed care is super duper important to me, and I've also just always been drawn to visual arts. And now I have like a platform where I'm able to, I think mostly because of this class, where I'm able to like visualize and like conceptualize like certain social justice things that I'm very interested in for other people, and create art that communicates that. So that's something that's affected me like in the short term, but in the long term, I do want to use like arts as a means of therapy. Like I think it's incredibly powerful, the fact that you don't have to like verbalize experiences but rather express them through something else is really, really powerful.
And I would just like to echo what both Rachel and Shruti had said, because additionally, I also would like to pursue a career in healthcare. And yeah, exactly what they said. I feel like using these art-based techniques as a new approach to get a more holistic understanding of an individual's entire experience, and how all these different components make up their health and their well-being, has been incredibly impactful for me. And I'll definitely use it on a personal level in the way that I approach things, and also hopefully work to getting these things more implemented on a more systemic level as well.
And please forgive me. I think, Rachel, maybe you say that, but you are writing your senior thesis about these tools. So please go ahead. How important this is, just writing for an undergrad, writing a senior thesis about everything that we are talking about in the panel.
Absolutely, yes. That's a very important item to share as well. So as Ara said, with this study abroad experience, as I mentioned before, it was just so transformative, eye-opening, and I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop with this work, and I needed to continue to analyze those experiences and analyze these tools that we're using. So what I decided to do with that is continue the work that we were doing in that study abroad program, and translate that into a senior thesis project, and writing about these tools and how they can be used as a really effective, unique method for connecting with these survivors, and really emphasizing how we're avoiding this re-traumatization, re-victimization in that way. And these can just be so powerful tools for not only teaching students about these issues and training kind of the next generation of human rights advocates, but also allowing this safe outlet to process trauma for the women that we met with, and allowing them to collectively share their stories in that way. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
So Ara, I might go back to you, also kind of combining a few questions that I've received. One relates to the construction of silence you mentioned in the beginning. So not only was that happening with the women in the systems and in larger society, but even, it happened even with the best of intentions in the organizations that are trying to provide services, because they get very caught up in trying to help the immediate needs of the women, but sometimes the stories get lost. And I think you described a little bit of how these tools even helped those organizations understand the women that they're working with better. So if you could comment a little on that. And then at the same time, I know from speaking with you, from doing the courses in person, moving to virtual, how the organizations themselves have increased in their comfort level of working with survivors based on the tools that you've developed together. They were not so willing to do this because it was quite scary, honestly. It's a very sensitive topic. It's very difficult to do. So maybe talk about those two things, how those organizations kind of also were brought along.
That's a great question also. Thank you. You're right. So my relationship with these organizations comes back for many years now. And at the beginning, when I proposed to some of the organizations, especially in Spain, so we started in Spain and in Madrid, when there it was Doctors of the World, Médicos Mundi, Women in Conflict Zone, Proyecto Esperanza. So there were several organizations, and especially Proyecto Esperanza, like Project Hope, translated. They were very hesitant to work with us. And so I tried to explain what we wanted to do for the sake of everyone. And they were hesitant, and I completely understood. So they thought that, these academics, again, they come and they do research, and then we are going to re-victimize the women, and that's not what we want. So all of us were very, very cautious. So little by little, we all understood that we wanted the same for everyone. And this was, of course, what we are doing is a training for our own UW students, but without damaging and re-victimizing the women, or without interrupting the work of the organizations, just the opposite, just helping, collaborating with organizations for the same purpose, just for the sake of the women. At the same time, for the sake of our students, so for all. So the organizations at first didn't want us, we didn't do much in terms of, especially the ones that already work with survivors in Spain. They have to be very, very careful. So we did some cultural things, some exchange, some drawing, some very, very few tools. And little by little, we started developing more tools, and the organizations were very willing and open to start with more tools. And last year, through the virtual course, it was the first time that Proyecto Esperanza, that is one of the most important human trafficking organizations in Europe, told us that for the women, this had been a catharsis, because they have never been able to express themselves the same way that they were able to do it. And maybe because of the distance, maybe because they were in a safest place. I mean, they were confined, but they felt safer in their own spaces, maybe by doing these directed collages. But something that happened is that after the collages, the women wanted to record videos. So they started recording videos of themselves, even using some of their own stories without feeling re-victimized. And then for the first time after many years, the organizations, the leaders of the organizations could really understand what was inside the women. And sometimes it's true, they don't have the time. They have so much work to do with the survivors that there is no time. But it's not their job to elicit the stories of the women. And they want to know, but they don't want to ask the women. They don't want the women to retell their stories, because they are very cautious, and they know that can be very easily re-traumatized. So yes, so working with the organization has been really a tremendous blessing for all, and trust. Building trust has been very important as academics and as organizations.
Great, thank you. And then there's one other question. How are you getting the messaging back to Nigeria to discourage this type of migration? So I might open it up to the students first. If you have some comments, maybe Justine, you could expand a little on your final project, or you, Sruti, or all of you, and then let Ara kind of wrap up on some of the bigger picture ways that Streets is also trying to facilitate through film in other ways. So one of your students want to start?
Yeah, I can start. So our final projects were, the assignment was very open. It was so we were using all the information, all the stories that the women had given us, and our assignment was to direct something back to the women in Nigeria, the young girls in Nigeria. So for my project, we worked on direct flyers and images that were warnings and information. And so we had the one where we had quotes of the different women and their stories. And then I had my painting, and then We had another infographic where there was like all this information about the women who do go to Europe and what happens to them. So those were all like warnings, and there is an organization in Nigeria that is using our images as like advertising and informative material.
Yeah,
Justine?
so like, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Like Shruti said, the project was to transmit the message back. And so the theme that my group decided to kind of draw from what we had learned was the idea of empowerment as more of taking an upstream approach to preventing trafficking from beginning in the first place by empowering girls and women. So for my group's project, we created multiple different posters that kind of symbolized different messages of empowerment, with a theme of starting at like the birth of a baby girl all the way up until being a woman and pursuing education. In these different opportunities. And so in a similar way, we created different posters, and then we also decided to like add some cohesiveness to them and some rhythm, and we created them into a movie and made it stop motion so that there's background music, and that at each point the posters kind of build on each other and build throughout the life course of empowering girls and women. And so those tools are out there available for the different organizations that we worked with to use as well.
And didn't you use the song as background music, or was that another group? One of the groups did.
We used a song, but I think it was a different song. But it was music that we had learned.
Great, thanks. And yes, I just got a question. I think you will be able to see, I think we're going to add that final video as well to our website. So in a couple weeks, Andrea asked that question. You'll be able to see that on the Streets website. So check back through 4W on that. Ara, did you want to comment on getting the message back to Nigeria and maybe Thread of the Moon as well?
Yes. So the idea, this is very interesting, because when we started doing this work with organizations and with the women, that's something that we didn't really think about. It's a brilliant idea to bring back the stories, the questions, the issues of the women who are already in a destination or in transit back to origin of trafficking. But that's really is not, we don't have to take credit for this. These were the ideas of the women already in the destination country, who told us, why you are the ones who are mobile. You are the ones who have the privilege to have internet and to physically migrate and to physically move if you want, which is really something to think about. But they were asking us to bring their voices, their stories, their warning signs back to Nigeria, to their sisters. So it was not a way for the women to discourage their sisters from migration, because they know that if they want to migrate, and this is a human right, they are going to do whatever it takes to migrate. But the women already in the destination country wanted to create some tools for protection for the women back home, so that they could tell us just what I mentioned before. If someone is going to do what is called the juju, there is this type of Nigerian black magic that is not black magic just to do bad things, it's also to do good things, but the traffickers use it for the wrong purpose. So to use the juju, so don't listen to the priest, don't let your menstrual blood to be taken away, don't let the priest to take your hair. So the women wanted specific messages to be brought back to origin, so that we could share them with the women. So there are several ways that we have done it with the students, with their final projects. Like one is, as Justine said, just raising the status of girls and women back home. That was very important. So through this video and through this poster that the organizations are using, you can see the joy of being born a girl. What is the joy? So the organizations are using this just to, as a starter points for conversations in the community, what it means in this community to be a girl, what it means to be a woman, what it means to grow up and wanting to live. And then or working with organizations, so many things have happened back home. So one of the ideas that came out after this happened a couple of years ago, that people in Nigeria and outside Nigeria were getting sick and tired of seeing the girls and the women just migrating and being trafficked during migration. So they contacted the highest priest in the Edo state, the Oba is called. And so the Oba has no like political power, but it has a lot of prestige and a lot of like spiritual power. So they asked the Oba to do a counter black magic, a counter juju, then to punish the traffickers for trafficking the girls. And so that decreased in the next couple of years after the Oba did this. It decreased the number of girls that were trafficked, but they were able to migrate, which is just incredible that this can happen. So sometimes the solutions come just from within, but everything helps, like bringing the voices of women back. And it's like there is a ripple effect about everything we do.
Wonderful. I think we have addressed at least somewhat all of the questions that we received, and I think we've got a few minutes left in case our organizers have any messages for attendees. But thank you all. Thank you, Ara, for the incredible work you did to translate this, Rachel for being in both courses to some extent, and Justine and Sruti for your participation here and your incredible art that you've shared with all of us. So I'll turn it over to Lori, I think, to wrap up with logistics.
Yeah, I would really like to thank everyone. To see this work develop over the years is just amazing. And the students did, I think it's such a great credit to a teacher when they don't have to say very much, because their students are so, have been such partners in the work. And so I think anyone who studied with Ara and Jean knows that's how they teach, and it really shows. So congratulations to all of you. And I know that, it's more than just a class, that you really carry the work and values in your heart, and you will for a long time. And that that's, that is really what it's all about, is this kind of linking purpose with learning and action. So thank you. I do want to announce that the fun has only just begun. Take a break, everyone. At 12:45, we have growth starts at the end of your comfort zone. At 2:30, and then another little break, and then at 2:15 today, reflecting mirrors of possibilities. But at 4 o'clock, we have one of our big keynotes. Also, Leah Lakshmi Pipesna is going to be speaking. So please check out our program and visit our art show and all the presentations from the participants as well. Thank you all. This was just such a wonderful start to this 3-day program, and I hope that we'll see you in other sessions. Thank you.